Hello people, this video is just a quick account of me bleeding out the brake system on this car. I just rebuilt the calipers, there's new pads, put some new rotors on as well. The project had been sitting for quite a while without the brake lines connected, and the brake fluid had completely drained out. Also in the back again, tidied up the calipers, new pads and new rotors. I'd suggest you wear gloves when doing this job. Brake fluid on your skin's not a healthy thing. Now to begin this job, make sure that you clean the top of the brake fluid reserve off. This one had a lot of dust and dirt on it. I just don't want that ending up in the brake fluid. We're trying to keep the whole system here quite clean. Also, when you buy your brake fluid, make sure you buy the recommended brake fluid for your vehicle. It's quite easy to look up the specifications of what you need. Remember to clean out the underside of the cap as well. It can often get a lot of dirt and muck on it. As you saw there, the reservoir on mine was completely empty. The fluid had drained out completely when the calipers were removed. I'm just adding this to the reservoir here slowly. Just avoid any spillage. It's good to have a cloth or a rag handy just in case you do spill it. As this pours in, you can begin to see that it's filling up to the maximum level here. While we're bleeding the brakes, you're going to want to keep this as full as possible at all times, and keep a good eye on it, because if the level drops down too low, it may be drawing air in and you're going to have to start the process again. After the fluid is fully topped up, I've moved to the rear left caliper. Now this one happens to be furthest away from the master cylinder. Next thing I want to get to is the bleed valve. Make sure that it's clear. There's often a plastic or a rubber cap on these. This one was missing. And also when getting onto these, don't use the open end of the spanner. Make sure you use the ring end of the spanner, because often these little valves can be really quite tight and you do not want to round the nut off, otherwise you'll have all sorts of problems. Here I want to loosen it a little bit and then attach a tube that can take the brake fluid away. Typically at this point, with it loosened, brake fluid would begin to seep out. However, because these lines were totally empty, there was nothing in there at all. As I was doing this part of the job myself, I was using a vacuum pump just to help draw out that brake fluid through the lines. Initially when you're pumping, nothing is coming through here, but as we keep going, you begin to start to see some brake fluid splashing through that clear pipe. Keep on using the vacuum pump until you can start to see a fairly steady stream of fluid coming out. At this point, there's still a lot of air in it, so I just did a few more pumps to try and clear as much as possible. Remember, my brake lines were completely empty. Typically, you're always going to have something in them, which will make this process a whole lot quicker and easier. Using the vacuum pump can actually be a little bit deceptive as to how much fluid or air is passing through those lines. Often what happens with the vacuum pump is it's drawing air in and around the threads of the bleed screw, which gives the appearance of a whole lot more air in those lines than what there actually is. However, we can see that a significant amount of fluid is passing through the clear tubing, which means it is passing through the brake lines. After doing the two rear brakes, you can now move on to the front. Make sure you turn the steering wheel to make it as easy as possible for you to access that bleed screw. This one does have the rubber cap on it. Make sure that you just pull this off, and I took it completely off to get it out of the way while I was just working in and around it. Don't forget to put these back on later on. Again, use the ring spanner to crack open the bleed screw here. Remember, fluid will typically come out the moment you've undone these, but these brake lines were dry. Fitting the vacuum pump now, we can start to draw some of the brake fluid through the hose. Again, we'll begin to see it quite aerated to begin with. Then we should get a fairly steady stream of fluid. Bearing in mind that the vacuum pump will draw in air around the threads of the bleed screw, so don't be too concerned if you do see some air at this stage. Once we're finished with this brake here, we then moved on to the other front brake. Bear in mind, while completing this process, you do want to keep an eye on the brake fluid reservoir, making sure that its level doesn't get too low, otherwise you're going to have to recommence and start the whole process again. Try and keep the level between the maximum and minimum points while you're going through this process. After using the vacuum pump on all four brakes, it was then more of a traditional method of bleeding the brakes that just involved using a pipe and somebody else pressing the brake pedal for you. At this point here, we should be able to see no air bubbles once we're finished. Note here too that the pipe actually goes up and higher than the brake caliper, just so this way that the air can be seen to be travelling up that pipe and we're not going to get any airlocks. As I've loosened this here, you can begin to see that it is bubbling up a little bit and a little bit of trapped air is starting to come out. This is even before we've pumped the brakes. After a few pumps of the brakes here, and this is typically where you'd really like an assistant to help you, you'll begin to see less and less air bubbles and then just a nice constant smooth stream of the brake fluid running through the pipe. We can see here that there's still some minor bubbling in this stream. We want to do a few pumps of the brake pedal till we can just see a nice stream of the brake fluid without any air in it. Once we're getting closer to this, we will lock off the bleed valve and take away that pipe. This process is going to be repeated again for all 4 wheels. And again, as I said before, don't forget to keep an eye on that brake reservoir level, making sure that you don't run out. Also, typically here when we do pull the brake line away, you will get a little bit of dripping. You want to clean this off the brake calipers as quickly as you can. These ones have just been freshly painted, so the last thing I wanted on them was brake fluid. I just used a little bit of soapy water, sprayed it, washed it down and dried it off. Now continue this process with all 4 brakes. Remembering, you started with the one that was furthest away from the master cylinder and you're working towards the brake that's then closest to the master cylinder. Here's a shot of me doing the front brakes here. You can see the clear tube is connected to the bleed screw. The other end of the tube is just going to a bottle just to collect the runoff brake fluid. As I loosen the bleed screw, you can begin to see it running out straight away. This is just purely gravity feeding that brake fluid from the reservoir into the brake caliper. As we begin to pump this a little, you will begin to see a whole lot of movement of the fluid and a lot of air may still be in that fluid. You can see here there's just a few small bubbles that I want to get out because I want to have that nice clear stream just of brake fluid only. Remember, you're keeping an eye on the reservoir because at this point the brake pads will now be starting to touch the rotor because there's a little bit of pressure when you're pressing the brakes, and you'll find that you use a lot of brake fluid just to fill up the space that's behind the piston in the caliper. So keep a very close eye on the levels of brake fluid in the reservoir. Here we're just tightening it back off. We'll pull the tube out and we'll just clean up any mess that we happen to make. Always have a rag or something handy here because sometimes it can be a little bit of a messy job. When finishing off, make sure that you've done the bleed screw up tight on all 4 of the calipers, and if it has the cover, make sure the cover is reinstalled because this will avoid any dirt getting in underneath there and potentially causing a problem next time you use it. Also make sure that you have a nice firm pedal, and again, this is just general advice. Whenever you're working with your brakes, make sure you feel confident or you have somebody else who's confident that can help you out because it is a safety feature of your car. And look, this is all sorted, job done. Hey now, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, make sure you hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe as well. Any comments or questions, please leave it below and please check out my other videos. Thanks.